The moment my wife stepped out of the car, in full Navy dress uniform, everything in the neighborhood seemed to freeze. People who were mowing their lawns stopped mid-step. Kids on bikes slowed to a crawl, and even old Mrs. Jenkins, across the street, squinted through her porch blinds, trying to make sense of the scene. My wife, Commander Jenna Taylor, had just returned home after nearly a year aboard the USS Harry S. Truman, and all she wanted was a quiet, peaceful homecoming. But the neighborhood had other plans, specifically, one self-righteous woman named Karen, our HOA president, who believed the entire block was her kingdom. Karen's house sat diagonally across the street from ours, and from the very beginning, she seemed to believe she had authority over everything that happened in the community. When she saw Jenna stepping out of the car, in full uniform, shoulders back, ribbons glinting in the sun, something in her snapped. She came rushing out of her front door with her phone already to her ear, barking into it like she was calling. In an airstrike, yes. Hello, I need to report suspicious activity. There's someone in a fake military uniform walking around my neighbor's property. Yes, she's trespassing. She made sure to say it loud enough for Jenna to hear. But Jenna didn't flinch. She just looked at me and gave a soft smile, the kind that said, I've dealt with worse than this in the middle of the ocean. Now, let me rewind a bit. I had moved into this suburban neighborhood about 6 months ago, while Jenna was still out at sea. I picked this house because it was perfect for us, quiet street, nice yard for our dog Max, and supposedly a low-drama community. The house was a little fixer-upper, but it had charm, and I wanted it to feel like home when Jenna got back. I didn't expect the welcome wagon to come with citations and warning letters from Karen over things like leaving a cardboard box out on recycling day or parking slightly crooked on my own driveway. I figured she was just another overzealous HOA type and tried not to stir the pot. Little did I know, she had a radar for drama, and my wife, returning home, was apparently a full-blown security emergency in her eyes. The day Jenna came home, I had decorated the front of the house with a big Welcome Back Commander banner. Nothing flashy, just a nice tribute. A few neighbors waved or nodded, clearly recognizing Jenna's uniform. But Karen was watching from behind her curtains, and within moments of Jenna stepping onto the driveway, she was dialing 911. I couldn't believe it. My wife had just gotten off a 14-hour journey from the base, hauling her gear, still in her dress whites. And the first thing she hears is a stranger accusing her of impersonating a military officer. Jenna looked at me and said, "Really? This is what I come home to?" But she wasn't angry, just disappointed. 5 minutes later, we heard the sirens. Not one, but 2 patrol cars rolled down our quiet street like they were responding to a robbery. Karen was standing at the edge of her lawn, waving the cops down like she'd just spotted an international fugitive. I stood next to Jenna as the officers got out, one hand on his belt and the other raising a calming palm. "Sir, we received a report of a woman in military uniform who may be impersonating an officer," he said cautiously. Jenna didn't even blink. She opened the side pocket of her duffel, pulled out her Navy ID, and presented it with full composure. "Commander Jenna Taylor, United States Navy," she said firmly. "I just returned from an 11-month deployment aboard the USS Harry S. Truman. This is my house." One of the officers took her ID, looked it over, then straightened up and gave her a proper salute. "Ma'am, welcome home." But of course, Karen wasn't satisfied. She marched over, arms crossed like she was some kind of law enforcement. "Back up. She still needs to prove she lives here," she insisted. "Just having an ID doesn't mean she belongs here. How do we know she didn't fake all this?" The officer turned to her with a look of pure disbelief. "Ma'am, she outranks all of us. You're making a serious accusation against a decorated officer." But Karen wasn't backing down. "I'm the HOA president. It's my duty to protect this neighborhood." Jenna let out a breath and said calmly, "And I've spent the last year protecting the entire country. Maybe it's time you sit down." At this point, more neighbors had come out to see what was going on. Some were filming on their phones, whispering to each other. The cop handed Jenna her ID back and said, "Sorry again, Commander. Clearly a misunderstanding." But I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. Karen wasn't confused. She was just offended by anyone who didn't bow to her little suburban throne. And now, she was embarrassed that she'd just called the police on a Navy commander who had more authority, discipline, and strength than she could ever dream of. Jenna picked up her bag and walked toward the house, but not before looking back at Karen and saying, "Next time you want to report someone, try using your brain first." It wasn't a threat, it was just a fact. Karen stood there, speechless, her phone still clutched in her hand like it was going to save her from looking like a complete fool. The cops drove off without another word, leaving her alone on the sidewalk, and that was just the beginning of the fallout that was coming her way. Karen had always been a thorn in the side of every neighbor on the block. But until that day, I hadn't realized just how far she was willing to go to assert her imaginary power. After Jenna's return, I finally started to piece together what kind of person Karen truly was. Her obsession with control wasn't limited to enforcing neighborhood lawn regulations. It went much deeper into a need to dominate, to micromanage, and to be the loudest voice in any room, even when no one wanted to listen. I remember when I first moved into the neighborhood, Jenna was still deployed, and I came alone with Max, our German Shepherd. The house needed work, but I loved it. It felt like a fresh start. Within days, I received my first HOA notice. Apparently, my trash can was out a full 12 minutes past the allowed time. At first, I thought it was a joke, but then came the complaints about the unauthorized flower box I'd installed, and the non-compliant doormat with a humorous quote that read, "Home is where the Wi-Fi connects automatically." I started to sense a pattern. Karen targeted anything that didn't fit into her idea of perfection. I learned from other neighbors that I wasn't alone. Mr. and Mrs. Patel, 2 houses down, had gotten written up for having a shade of beige on their fence that was too creamy. A retired Marine across the street, James, told me he had to fight the board for weeks because Karen didn't like the size of his American flagpole. She once even tried to fine a neighbor for parking their own car in front of their own house. During a family gathering, she made rules that didn't exist and enforced them like she was some kind of suburban dictator. And unfortunately, the rest of the HOA board just let her do it. Most were elderly, uninterested, or afraid to challenge her. The problem was, Karen believed her position gave her real authority more than even law enforcement or the Constitution itself. And so, when Jenna stepped out in her military dress whites, composed and commanding, it wasn't just confusion. Karen felt it was threat to her control, to her illusion of dominance. She didn't see Jenna as a homeowner or returning veteran. She saw her as someone she couldn't control. And that's what made her snap. What's wild is that even after the police verified Jenna's identity, even after the salute and the apology, Karen still wasn't done. That same evening, she sent out an email blast to the neighborhood through the HOA mailing list, with the subject line, "Concerning Incident Today." In it, she described a military impersonator who had alarmed several neighbors, and stated that she was working closely with local authorities to ensure safety. She never mentioned that the impersonator was in fact an active duty commander who lived here, or that it was her call that wasted police time. She even added a line suggesting that Jenna had refused to comply with HOA verification protocol. I was stunned. Jenna read the email out loud and just shook her head. "So she's doubling down," she said. Typical insecure bully behavior. But I wasn't about to let Karen rewrite the truth. I replied to the email thread with a calm but direct response, clarifying that Jenna was a U.S. Navy commander who had just returned from deployment, that the police confirmed everything and even saluted her, and that Karen had grossly misrepresented the facts. I attached a photo of Jenna in uniform, ID in hand on our porch, with the cops in the background. And then I ended with, "Please show our service members respect when they come home. They deserve better than this." Within an hour, over a dozen replies came pouring in, neighbors supporting us, thanking Jenna for her service, and calling Karen's behavior shameful, disgusting, and un-American. Suddenly, Karen didn't look like a concerned citizen. She looked like a power-tripping busybody who had finally been exposed. But what truly blew my mind was that instead of apologizing or taking a step back, she went on the defensive. The next day, she showed up at our door, clipboard in hand, wearing a stiff blazer like she was running for mayor. "We need to talk," she said coldly. Jenna and I stepped onto the porch. According to HOA Code 4.23, she began, "Residents must inform the board when a new occupant arrives. Your wife never submitted the proper forms to register her residency." Jenna crossed her arms and said, "I'm not a new occupant. I've owned this house with my husband since he bought it. And even if I were new, this isn't a rental. You don't get to approve who lives in their own home." Karen's face twitched, but she pushed forward. "We just asked for basic compliance. It's for everyone's safety." "Really?" Jenna said. "Because it seems like you're more concerned with control than safety." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're not above the rules just because you wear a uniform." Jenna smiled. "No, but I've led sailors through war zones with more discipline than this neighborhood. Trust me, I know the difference between rules that matter and ones that are made up to make someone feel important." Karen walked away fuming, and within 24 hours, she sent another notice, this time a violation about the welcome banner I had hung. Unapproved signage, it said, but by this point, the neighborhood was turning against her. More residents began showing support. Kids had drawn thank you signs for Jenna in chalk on the sidewalks. Someone left a bouquet of flowers on our porch with a handwritten note that said, "Commander Taylor, welcome home. Thank you for everything." The neighbors weren't afraid of Karen anymore. It's like seeing Jenna stand tall against her had sparked something, courage, maybe, or just a sense that enough was enough. Karen's grip on the community was slipping, and she knew it. But instead of easing off, she started lashing out, even issuing citations for garden gnomes, barking at teenagers for riding bikes without reflectors, and even threatening to fine a single mom for letting her son shoot hoops in the driveway. It was getting out of hand, and people were starting to talk seriously about removing her. Meanwhile, Jenna.com, and poised through it all, had become a local hero not because she tried to be, but because she refused to be intimidated. She didn't shout, she didn't fight dirty, she just stood her ground and let the truth do the talking. And the neighborhood listened. It wasn't long before Karen's lies started catching up to her. The problem with building your authority on fear and false reports is that eventually, someone brave enough comes along and refuses to be quiet. And in this case, that someone was Jenna. After the welcome banner incident and the warning emails she sent out to the HOA, we noticed more and more people stopping by just to meet her. Some brought baked goods, others just shook her hand and said thank you. Even Mr. Gibson, the grumpy guy from the end of the cul-de-sac, who'd never spoken more than 2 words to anyone, came by to offer a cold lemonade and say, "You handled that woman better than the rest of us ever could." It was obvious that Karen's control over the neighborhood had started to fracture, and it all started with one moment of truth. The moment the cops pulled up, questioned Jenna, and left with an apology and a salute that changed everything. The real shift came. A week later, Jenna and I were finally trying to enjoy a quiet Sunday morning, just sipping coffee on the porch, Max dozing at our feet, when a letter arrived. It wasn't a friendly note or a welcome card. It was a formal notice from the HOA with Karen's signature at the bottom. According to her, we were in violation of Rule 7.4, unauthorized exterior decor, citing not only the welcome banner from the previous week but also our front porch, American flag, which had supposedly not been board approved. That was the last straw. Jenna leaned forward, grabbed the letter, and read it out loud. She's trying to cite us for flying an American flag. I could see the fire building in her eyes, not anger. Exactly, but that quiet, professional steeliness that I'd seen in her when she was preparing for something serious. "All right," she said calmly. "If she wants to play with rules and citations, I'll play too, but by real rules, not the fake ones she's inventing." Jenna spent the rest of that afternoon reading the HOA bylaws, every page of the official community documentation, and what she found was telling. Not only did Karen misquote nearly every rule she cited in her warnings, but many of them didn't even exist. Some were completely fabricated, others were twisted versions of old clauses that had since been amended or repealed. Jenna compiled everything, organized it into a detailed report, and then reached out to the HOA board members individually, not through Karen, but directly emails, phone calls, even knocking on a couple of doors to introduce herself and share what she had discovered. Most of the board members were surprised, a few were embarrassed, and some admitted outright that they hadn't really reviewed the rules in years and just trusted Karen to handle it. But Jenna wasn't done. She then contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA law and requested a formal review of our situation, Karen's pattern of complaints, and her abuse of power. Within days, the lawyer sent a letter to the HOA board, stating that Karen's behavior bordered on harassment and could open the association to legal liability if not addressed. That's when things really started moving. The board called an emergency meeting, open to all residents. It was the first time in years they'd held one, and word spread quickly. That evening, almost every family on the street showed up. Folding chairs lined the community center. People brought popcorn like it was a movie night. Karen walked in with her signature clipboard and stiff expression, acting as though she was about to give a keynote speech. But when the board president, an elderly gentleman named Robert, who looked like he'd rather be playing golf, stood and said, "Before we begin, Commander Jenna Taylor would like to present some concerns." Karen's face paled. Jenna stood, confidently, wearing a simple polo and jeans, no uniform this time, but she didn't need it. Her presence commanded attention. She calmly explained the events since her return. The false 911 call, the fabricated violations, the misquoted bio, the targeted harassment. She handed out printed copies of the rules with Karen's fake citations highlighted. She presented the letter from our attorney, and most importantly, she spoke with clarity and fairness, never once raising her voice. "I'm not here to attack anyone," she said. "I just want a neighborhood where people are respected, where homeowners don't feel intimidated by someone misusing their position." When she finished, a silence filled the room. Then a slow ripple of applause began from the back row, then the sides, then nearly everyone in the hall. Karen tried to speak, but when she did, it was weak and defensive. "This is a misrepresentation. I was just following protocol." But even the board had had enough. Robert said, "Karen, we appreciate your time served, but it's clear there's been a pattern here that doesn't reflect the spirit of this community." That night, the board unanimously voted to suspend Karen from all HOA activities pending a full review. It wasn't an official removal, not yet, but it was enough to show her that her reign of fear was over. The following week, things changed fast. Neighbors began to open up, not just to us, but to each other. People who hadn't spoken in years began sharing their stories of being intimidated, fined, or falsely reported by Karen. A few revealed they'd considered moving away, just to escape her. Jenna's calm resistance had broken the silence. Even the local news caught wind of the story: a Navy commander returning from deployment only to face HOA harassment. They ran a short feature titled Service and Civility. When leadership comes home. Jenna didn't want the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. If this encourages one community to question their leadership and treat each other better, she said, then it's worth it. Karen, meanwhile, became a ghost. Her house, once a hub of activity and surveillance, went quiet. The curtains stayed drawn. The clipboard disappeared. People noticed she stopped walking her little dog past our yard and avoided eye contact when driving by. Some said she was bitter. Others said she was embarrassed. Maybe it was both. All I knew was that the shadow she had cast over our peaceful street had finally lifted. Jenna wasn't just my wife or a returning officer. She had become something bigger, proof that integrity, respect, and quiet strength still held power, even in the middle of suburban politics. The ripple effect of what Jenna did was more powerful than either of us expected. It started with a single voice standing up to an overbearing HOA president. But soon it became something bigger, something that united an entire neighborhood that had been silently suffering under Karen's self-appointed rule for far too long. After the emergency board meeting, Jenna didn't gloat. She didn't brag or rub anything in Karen's face. She went back to being herself, walking Max every morning, helping the elderly neighbor with her groceries, waving to kids riding bikes. But the way the community now looked at her had completely changed. She wasn't just the Navy woman. She had become the reason people finally had the courage to push back against years of unfair treatment. In the days that followed Karen's suspension from the HOA, stories began to surface one after another. The single mom next door told Jenna how Karen used to leave notes on her car windshield, reminding her that low-income renters weren't encouraged in this community, even though she was the owner of her home. Another neighbor, an elderly war veteran, admitted he had paid fines for things that were never actually violations. He just didn't want the confrontation. Parents recalled how their children were scolded for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Couples talked about getting warning letters for flags, holiday decorations, or having too many guests over for a barbecue. All of it done in the name of protecting the neighborhood image. But now that someone had dared to stand up and hold Karen accountable, they weren't afraid to share anymore. Jenna took it all in with grace. She didn't turn it into a crusade, but every time someone came forward, she listened. That's what made people trust her even more. She even helped organize a casual Saturday afternoon block gathering. Small get-together so neighbors could reconnect after years of walking on eggshells. We set up a few folding tables, fired up a grill, brought out some music. To our surprise, over 30 families showed up. Kids played in the yard without fear of being yelled at for stepping on someone's grass. Elderly neighbors sat in lawn chairs and talked like old friends. One man even said, "This is the first time this place has actually felt like a community in years." All because Jenna reminded them what real leadership looks like, not power trips or threats, but fairness, patience, and presence. Meanwhile, Karen's silence grew louder. She was still in the neighborhood, of course, but her days of marching around with her clipboard were over. You could tell it burned her inside to see people smiling, gathering, and enjoying themselves without her permission. She had lost her grip, and the more she tried to pretend she was still relevant, the more invisible she became. The very next HOA meeting, held just 2 weeks after her suspension, drew a full house. The board officially voted to revise several outdated clauses and removed Karen's influence from nearly every committee she once controlled. New rules were passed to prevent any single person from holding unchecked power. Jenna didn't ask for credit, but everyone in the room knew who sparked the change. Then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a black SUV with government plates pulled into our driveway. A man in uniform stepped out, holding a folder. Jenna greeted him casually, but I noticed the neighbors peeking through windows. Curious, the officer introduced himself. As part of the Navy's Public Affairs Office, he had come to personally deliver a commendation letter from Jenna's commanding officer, recognizing her not just for her recent deployment, but for the leadership she showed back home. The Navy had seen the local news story and thought it deserved acknowledgement. "Most people think service ends when the deployment does," he said. "But what you did here proves that leadership is a full-time responsibility." Jenna blushed, but accepted the letter with humility. The story continued to spread. A veterans organization invited Jenna to speak at a community event about the role of leadership in civilian life. She didn't want the spotlight, but she understood the importance of the message. So she stood in front of a crowd of hundreds, sharing the story of how a peaceful homecoming turned into a battle with an HOA president who thought she was above everyone else. But Jenna didn't make it about Karen. She made it about doing the right thing, no matter how small the arena. "Whether you're on the deck of a carrier or standing on your front porch," she said, "doing the right thing matters." Karen didn't show her face at any more community events after that. Eventually, a for sale sign went up in her yard. No farewell parties, no goodbye notes. Just a quiet exit from a neighborhood that had finally found its voice. I won't lie, of me felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Karen had created an environment where fear and control replaced connection and community. But at some point, she must have believed she was doing the right thing. Power had blinded her, and when that power disappeared, so did her place in the community. But the story didn't end with her leaving. The real ending was how the neighborhood blossomed after her departure. People planted gardens without fear of being told the flowers were too colorful. Kids chalked superhero drawings across the sidewalks. Someone even painted a community mural on the fence near the park. HOA meetings became more open, more friendly, and more productive. And every time someone mentioned change, they referenced what Commander Taylor started for Jenna and me. Life finally settled. She got the rest she needed, began her transition back to shore duty, and spent more time at home with Max and me. We took walks in the evening and waved at almost every neighbor we passed. The house that once felt like a silent battleground was now filled with warmth and welcome. And even though Jenna never sought attention, the respect she had earned from our neighbors was permanent. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the sun go down, Jenna turned to me and said, "You know, I expected to fight battles in the Navy. I didn't think I'd have to fight one just to live in peace." I smiled and replied, "Funny thing is, you didn't even have to fight. You just stood up, and that was more than enough." She nodded, rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, she truly looked at peace. Weeks passed, and the peaceful rhythm of our lives began to settle in. Like the calm after a long storm, Jenna had officially transitioned into shore duty, which meant fewer unexpected deployments and more time at home. For the first time in over a decade, we had long, quiet mornings together, sharing coffee on the porch, watching Max chase squirrels in the yard, and enjoying the simplicity of being a normal couple in a normal neighborhood. Only now, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer. The shadow Karen had cast was completely gone, replaced by a sense of unity we'd never experienced before. People waved more. Kids played longer. Neighbors actually stopped to talk. There was laughter on the street again, and you could feel the difference. The Karen incident, as it had come to be known, had faded from the daily conversation. But the impact remained strong. Jenna never wanted to be the center of attention, and yet she had unknowingly become the heartbeat of the community. She showed people that standing up doesn't require yelling or aggression. It just takes quiet strength and unwavering truth. One Saturday morning, a group of neighbors knocked on our door, holding clipboards and big hopeful smiles. They had started a petition to formally elect a new HOA board. Not just replace Karen, but revamp the entire structure, write the laws, redistribute authority, and ensure no one person could hold unchecked power again. And they wanted Jenna to serve as the new community liaison, the bridge between the HOA and the residents. Jenna raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "I just wanted to come home, not run a government," she said. But after seeing the sincerity in their eyes, she agreed on one condition. "I won't run it like a dictatorship. I want it to be fair, honest, and transparent. Everyone gets a say." That was all they needed to hear. The election was held 2 weeks later at the local community center. It wasn't your usual HOA meet, felt more like a celebration. Families brought snacks, someone set up a lemonade stand, and a group of teenagers even performed a few acoustic songs. People laughed, kids played, and everyone had a vote. Jenna was elected unanimously to her liaison role, and 3 new board members were added to replace those who had previously remained silent under Karen's thumb. They all pledged to follow the new transparency rules that Jenna had helped draft. No more secret meetings, no more unexplained citations, and definitely no more power games. But perhaps the most heartwarming moment came during the first meeting of the new board. One of the younger residents, a shy teenage girl named Emily, stood up and addressed Jenna directly. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "When I saw you stand up to Mrs. Karen without yelling or being mean, it made me realize I could do the same at school. I was being bullied, and I was always scared to speak up. But after what you did, I went to my principal and told the truth. And now, it's better." The room went silent for a second, and then a wave of applause broke out. Jenna smiled, visibly touched, and replied softly, "That means more to me than any award I've ever received." And it wasn't just Emily. Over time, we heard more stories from people who had found their voice again. A retired couple finally painted their porch the color they'd always wanted. A young family started hosting monthly movie nights in their backyard. Someone set up a tiny community library on the sidewalk. It was like people had been waiting years to breathe, and now that they could, the whole street had come to life. There were no more citations for decorations, no more photos being taken without consent, no more whispered gossip fueled by fear. The culture of fear had been replaced with the culture of kindness. One day, a small envelope arrived in our mailbox. It was hand-addressed, with no return address. Inside was a simple card with neat cursive handwriting. It read, "I may never be able to say this in person, but I owe you an apology. I let control turn into obsession. I let fear of change make me cruel. You showed me what real strength looks like, and I wish I had realized it sooner. I've sold the house and left the state. I hope the neighborhood becomes everything you all deserve. Kay?" We both sat in silence after reading it. Karen, for all her faults, had finally seen the damage she caused. And though she'd never say it face to face, this silent surrender felt like closure. Jenna folded the note, placed it in a box of keepsakes, and said, "That chapter's closed. Let's move forward." And move forward we did. Jenna continued to serve the neighborhood with the same dedication she gave to her sailors, firm but fair, approachable, and always listening. Kids adored her. Adults respected her. She organized community cleanup days, helped install new benches in the park, and even started a mentorship group for teens interested in the military or public service. Our house became the heart of the block, not because we asked for it, but because people trusted us, and through it all, Jenna remained grounded. She never let the praise get to her head. In fact, she often reminded people that she was just someone who got tired of seeing things done the wrong way and decided to speak up. Years later, long after the Karen saga had become an old neighborhood tale, someone asked Jenna what made her take that first stand. Was it the uniform, the training, the discipline? Jenna smiled and shook her head. It was the principle. It was knowing that silence allows bad behavior to grow. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to say, "No more." One moment of clarity, that one line of truth, had changed everything, not just for us, but for every person who called this neighborhood home. And me. I couldn't be prouder. I got to watch my wife come home from war, only to face a different kind of battle, one that no one saw coming, but one that mattered deeply. And she didn't just win it. She changed the battlefield into something better. From our porch, as I sip my coffee and watch Jenna talk with neighbors, laugh with kids, and help plant flowers in the median, I know one thing for sure. The real victory wasn't in defeating Karen. It was in giving people their voice back, in turning fear into friendship, and in showing everyone what leadership truly means, even on the quietest street in America.